Okay, so I guess we will get started. I will just double check that our slides are all up. Great. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Freya Witten, and I am the Program Manager of Terrestrial Restoration and Management at Credit Valley Conservation. I am pleased to be moderating this evening's session and would like to welcome you to our discussion of the spongy moth, or LDD. So this insect, which has become very familiar to us in Ontario over the last year or so, has gone by a few names, including its scientific name, Lymantria dispar, as well as its former common name, the European gypsy moth. And in the last few months, a new official name was selected for this insect, and you'll hear presenters referring it to spongy moth or LDD, which is what a lot of us have used as our short form. So I'm joined this evening by 5 colleagues representing conservation authorities in Southern Ontario. They'll each introduce themselves to you when they come forward to speak. Next slide. So over the course of the webinar, we will cover a number of topics related to spongy moth, and these include what spongy moth is, its history in North America, what we might expect to see in our forests this year in 2022, what spongy moth is considered, or why spongy moth is considered to be a problem, what the conservation authorities are doing to address it, and what homeowners can do. And then we'll finish off with a panel discussion where we'll address some of your questions. Next slide. So from a housekeeping standpoint, if you're accessing the webinar by phone, you can swipe between the slide view and the webcam view. Due to the number of participants this evening, all have been muted to limit background noise. If you have a question, please write it in the chat panel. We will answer them at the end of the presentation. This presentation is being recorded, and in the coming days, the conservation authorities here tonight will post it on their websites for viewing. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please send an email to Monica Chow, and her email will be listed here and in the chat, which she'll provide support to you. Next slide. So I'd like to now do a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to begin by recognizing that wherever we all work, live, and gather on traditional Indigenous territory. We respectfully acknowledge that the lands we are situated on are the traditional territories and the treaty lands, in particular those of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe of the Williams Treaty First Nations, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Through our work with land and water resources within the GTA, we appreciate and respect the history and diversity of this land. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work and meet in this territory. We are also grateful for the continued work of many Indigenous peoples who are the original caretakers of this land, and humbly acknowledge our responsibility to respect Indigenous perspectives and elevate Indigenous voices. We invite you to acknowledge the Indigenous territories and treaty lands in your local area and encourage you to explore the interactive map at nativeland.ca. As a collective, we recognize and deeply appreciate the relationship and that Indigenous nations have within the lands and waters. We acknowledge that Indigenous practices of land stewardship have created the clean waters and healthy forests, meadows, and wetlands that benefit and enrich the lives of all. Thank you, Miigwech. So next slide. So unique to Ontario, conservation authorities are local watershed management agencies that deliver services and programs to protect and manage impacts on water and other natural resources in partnership with all levels of government, landowners, and many other organizations. Conservation authorities promote an integrated watershed management approach, balancing human, environmental, and economic needs, and conservation authorities are organized on a watershed basis. There are 31 conservation authorities operating in Southern Ontario, and 5 delivering programs and services in Northern Ontario. Our presenters this evening represent 5 conservation authorities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe area, which are highlighted on this map and include the Credit Valley Conservation, Halton Region Conservation Authority, Hamilton Conservation Authority, Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, and Toronto Region Conservation Authority. Next slide. Just before I pass the presentation off to our first speaker, Brianna McLaughlin from Credit Valley Conservation, we'd like to do a quick poll of our audience to hear where you're joining us from. We'll have a few polls like this throughout the presentation, and we'll share the results with you as we move along. So with that, let's get started.
Okay, so our first poll is where are you joining us from today? And we will close the voting for that in 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see our results. Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of people from York, Toronto, Durham here, almost half, and a lot of people from Simcoe region. So welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Glad you could make it, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So without further ado, if we could get the next slide, please. We will move right into what is LDD. So spongy moth, or LDD, is a non-native moth that's originally from Europe. Although it can use over 400 species as a host plant, the caterpillar's favorite food are oak trees. However, heavy defoliation has been recorded in several other species, including maple, aspen, birch, white pine, and blue spruce. LDD caterpillars are voracious eaters, as I'm sure many of you are aware. A single caterpillar can consume up to 1 meter squared of foliage during its lifetime. Next slide. To help you identify LDD moth, I'd like to take you through its life stages. The female lays egg masses in the late summer, which overwinter until the spring. The egg masses are laid on tree trunks, bark, outdoor furniture, the sides of buildings, wood piles, and basically any hard, sheltered surface. The caterpillars emerge anywhere from late April to mid-May, depending on spring conditions. This is the most destructive phase of the life cycle, as they eat leaves from the time they emerge until the eggs, from their eggs until they pupate in late July or August. The adult moths live for about 2 weeks after emerging, during which their sole purpose is to mate and lay eggs for the next generation. Next slide, please. The egg masses are golden brown and fuzzy when they're fresh, with small hard eggs inside which pop when they're crushed between 2 fingernails, if that's your thing. As the egg masses get older, they start to lighten and harden, turning into creamy white and glue-like substance. Counting LDD egg masses can help with predicting future defoliation levels by determining a rough estimate of the number of caterpillars that may emerge the following year in a given area. Comparing new egg masses versus old egg masses can help predict population trends by looking at what proportion of the egg masses on the trees are part of the current population. Egg masses range from dime size to toonie size and can contain up to 1,000 eggs each, with the smaller dime-sized egg masses having fewer eggs and the larger toonie-sized egg masses having up to 1,000 eggs per mass. Next slide. Okay, so as LDD caterpillars grow, they go through 5 distinct growth stages. Tiny newly hatched caterpillars appear black and can be carried by the wind up to 1 kilometer from where they're hatched. You can see how small they are relative to the hand in the top left photo. The third growth stage is when the distinctive striping and spots start to appear, which become very pronounced in the 4th and 5th growth stages, as seen in the 2 right photos. During the early growth stages, caterpillars feed during the day, but as they get larger and easier for predators to spot, they begin to feed mostly at night. And eat they do. About 90% of that 1 meter squared of leaves consumed are eaten during the last 2 growth stages. LDD moth caterpillars are commonly mistaken for eastern forest tent caterpillars. Eastern or forest tent caterpillars. Eastern are the ones who build webs and tents, and they have a distinctive white line down the center of their backs, while forest tent caterpillars have 2 blue lines, one on each side of their back, with dots down the center. Next slide, please. Pupa. So the pupa are dark brown in color with yellow and white hairs, as seen in the bottom right photo. They can be found in sheltered spaces, commonly in tree bark crevices, clumped leaves, or even in shed or house overhangs. The female moths are flightless and are white or cream in color. Their wings have dots on the tips and an arch pattern in between the veins, as seen in the top left photo. The males are brown or tan colored with dark arches on their wings and frilly antennae to help them find a lucky lady. They can fly long distances to mate, which contributes to their spread. I'll now turn it over to Corey Byron from Lake Simcoe Region Conservation to talk about the history of LDD and the expansion of the moth.
Thanks, Brianna, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. I'm going to start off by describing a little bit of the history of the spongy moth and how it arrived here in North America. And we'll chat a little bit about how we got to where we are today during our outbreak. So the spongy moth is native to Western Europe. So there it exists naturally in an ecosystem, and it has its own set of natural predators. Unlike most of our invasive species, or a lot of them anyways, that we've seen here in North America, this one was actually introduced on purpose. And the reason that's kind of unique is that when we think of invasives here, the vast majority of them have arrived by accident. Oftentimes, they arrive in cargo ships and ballast water. That's how we get a lot of our invasive aquatic organisms, as well as in packaging, dunnage, and pallets and shipments and things like that. So that's how a lot of our invasives get here. Often they arrive undetected to us, and we kind of don't realize until it's a little bit too late. In this case, this one was introduced on purpose. In 1868, a gentleman by the name of Etienne Trouvelot, he brought it over, and he resided in a suburb of Boston called Meaford. He had a grand plan of establishing a silk industry in North America, but he was going to crossbreed the spongy moth with our native North American silkworm. But he quickly realized that the two species are actually incompatible and they can't crossbreed. So he also quickly realized that the spongy moth that he brought over had escaped his steady area, and it actually had flown into a neighboring forest. And it was starting to cause some defoliation there. So it's just crazy how fast it spread from there. After less than 100 years in the United States, so by the 1960s, as you can see on that map on the bottom right side, the spongy moth had spread throughout all of New England, including Long Island, New York State, and all the way up to the Canadian border with New Brunswick and Quebec. So it only took about 100 years for it to spread across all of New England. And back then, it's important to note that people didn't travel as freely and goods didn't move as quickly. So the fact that it spread that quickly in less than 100 years goes to show how fast it does spread. Of course, today, it's not uncommon for people to travel 4 to 5 hours to go for a weekend of camping. So we are able to spread these things much faster nowadays. If I could go to the next slide, please. So in the late 1960s, it was first detected in our province of Ontario here. And as you can see, in 1981, we had our first record of the severe defoliation, which was in Kemptville district, just south of Ottawa. So from its arrival to the first outbreak was only 12 years. So that goes to show how fast it does move. Since the 1980s, we've had 4 or 5 outbreaks since then. They're ranging anywhere from 50,000 to 350,000 hectares. So pretty sizable. You can also see from the graph that the population growth and crash is very cyclical. And it happens, the population expands very rapidly, and it's almost always followed by a super quick, dramatic population crash. And I won't get too much into the population dynamics. I think we'll save that for another slide. But you can see the cycles, and you can see they tend to happen roughly every 7 to 10 years. Next slide, please. So where are we at with our current outbreak? This is a map here that we've got. It shows some of the defoliation that we saw in the last growing season. So since 2019, defoliation in hectares has increased from about 43,000 all the way up to over 1.7 million. So pretty substantial. Severe defoliation, most of it was seen, as you can see, in Eastern Ontario in a block from about Ottawa through to Peterborough, and about 150 kilometers or so in diameter, that rectangle there. There's another band that runs down from Simcoe, Muskoka through York region and down into the Greater Toronto area, and another band running from essentially the Niagara Peninsula up to Lake Huron and all the way down to Chatham-Kent. So not much of our province has been spared from this most recent outbreak. You can see in the north too, we've got some activity happening in a band running from Timmins down to Sudbury, onto Manitoulin Island, and across all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie. And if you look at this map too, I just wanted to draw your attention to the city of Toronto, or the Greater Toronto area down there as well. It looks on the map that it's free and clear of spongy moth, but that's not the case. Many of you who reside in that area will know that there is an active population there. And the reason it's white on the map is not because the pest doesn't exist there, it's just because the ministry doesn't actually conduct surveys in built up populated areas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen now from Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, and she's going to chat a little bit about the 2022 forecast and what exactly causes outbreaks.
Thanks, Corey. Next slide, please. I know everyone is anxious to find out about what's going to happen with this year's infestation, especially because last year was so bad, but it's important to note that insect infestations can be very challenging to predict. This map was produced by the NDMNRF and is based on egg mass surveys conducted in fall across the southern region. As Corey mentioned, the ministry does not fly over populated areas, so this map excludes the GTA forecast. It does show that the areas of Aylmer, Guelph, Parry Sound, Bancroft, and Pembroke are likely to experience moderate to severe levels of infestation this year. The Midhurst district can expect light levels of infestation. Monitoring undertaken by conservation authorities and our municipal partners in the GTA indicate that severe infestations this year are likely to be patchy. Some areas may be hit harder than others. That said, we're cautiously optimistic that natural controls present in the environment are resulting in an LDD population contraction in our area, and we'll hear more on this later. Next slide, please. So what causes outbreaks? The cause is likely due to a combination of factors, including lots of available food, oaks are one of their preferred trees, hot, dry springs and summers, and warm winters with lots of snow. Add on top of this that this insect is well adapted for movement. When they are just hatched and tiny, the caterpillars are easily spread by wind, and that's why you sometimes see infestations concentrated on hilltops. Periods of low LDD abundance are also implicated in outbreaks, since when there is fewer LDD around, there are also fewer predators, parasites, and disease. Next slide, please. After last year's infestation, everyone here is likely very well aware of why LDD is a problem. Most notably, LDD results in social and economical impacts since infestations make green spaces and even your backyard less appealing to use because exposure to the caterpillars can cause temporary skin rashes. It impacts outdoor recreational pursuits, and it makes our beautiful trees look quite ugly via defoliation. LDD causes economic impacts due to tree mortality, which means that they need to be replaced, which is especially evident in urban areas where trees may be more stressed and may die from LDD. And then, of course, there is the cost to manage and educate people about this pest. Ecologically speaking, healthy deciduous trees can withstand up to 3 years of defoliation, and in general, we are not overly concerned about the effects that LDD is having on our natural forests. However, coniferous or evergreen trees are not as resilient to LDD damage, and just 1 year of defoliation can kill them. We are also concerned about the potential loss of oaks from the landscape and the loss of ecologically significant trees, such as large mass-producing species. But it's important to note that we cannot consider LDD alone or just as an impact to trees. We need to look at the whole intricate ecosystem. And now I'd like to call on Jennifer Roberts from Conservation Halton to tell us more about how LDD has naturalized.
Thanks, Karen. So LDD is considered an invasive species, but has evolved to a state of naturalization. This means it has a self-sustaining population, which will have periodic outbreaks. There are some natural control methods, including both a virus and a fungus. The nuclear polyhedrosis virus, or NPV, infects the caterpillars, causing them to die and continues to spread through contact between caterpillars. It can also be spread through the feces of birds and other small mammals that eat dead or dying caterpillars, and the effectiveness of the virus is dependent on high caterpillar density. So if there's not enough caterpillars to sustain the virus, then the virus dies off. So it's a real catch-22. The fungus Entomophaga mimega is another control measure that's developed naturally. It overwinters in the soil and infects the caterpillars, causing their death. It needs cool, wet weather to persist and be effective, which is why we had such a great die-off last year with that nice, cool, wet summer that we had. These natural controls are part of why the population declines after a few years. Other factors can include competition for food and mating. Some host trees do have natural defenses against the defoliation, and wildlife such as birds and small mammals eat the LDD caterpillars, pupa, and egg masses. As well, we've been seeing some of the natural predators, parasitoids, and competitors on the egg masses. We did a bunch of surveys this year, and we saw the egg masses with these tiny little pinholes in them, which indicates that they've been parasitized. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So there are other non-native forest pests and pathogens that are of much greater ecological concern. Hemlock woolly adelgid is an invasive species that is threatening all the hemlock populations. It has been found down in the Niagara area, so we're keeping a close eye out for that. Emerald ash borer, I'm sure everybody's heard about that by now. Every ash tree has been killed or is being killed off by this pest. There's a couple coming up on the horizon, the spotted lanternfly, which will be more of a concern for orchards and those sorts of farm type fruit trees. Oak wilt is on the border down in the Sarnia area, and beech leaf disease has been confirmed in the Aylmer and Guelph district right now. So on the grand scheme of things, we're really looking at the forest as a whole and seeing what other species are going to be attacking our forests. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to introduce Leslie McDonald from Hamilton Conservation Authority.
Thanks, Jen. So this slide is in regards to other invasive plant species we're worried about. So as you can see on the slide, there are the top 10 invasive species that the majority of southwestern Ontario and the greater golden horseshoe species we are concerned about. And why are we concerned about these species? It's mainly because they can cause a high reduction in the amount of biodiversity in an area. As you can see in the picture on the slide, this is a picture of Bohemian knotweed. It's a type of knotweed. It can grow very, very tall. And this is our staff on a private landowner property trying to remove this species. This will probably be a 5-year fight. And you can see underneath, the ground underneath our employee there has nothing else but the stalks of the Bohemian knotweed. So this is a concern where invasive plant species come in that they reduce biodiversity and they can really take over things like dog strangling vine in forests and meadows, Macranthus species and Phragmites in wetlands, and many other species. Norway maple are a particular concern in ravine areas where they provide such dense shade that a lot of our native species can't grow underneath them. Next slide, please. So what are some things that invasive plant management, just quickly, that landowners can do for these plants that were just mentioned? There's lots of options for what we would call manual control. And there's lots of resources for that. So you can see on the slide, there's 3 places you can go that have lots and lots of information on manual control for invasive species. So the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, Ontario Invading Species Awareness Program, and the Invasive Species Center. So some options for landowners include smothering. You can do this for a species called giltweed. You just cut it down, bag it up in a plastic bag, and then you can put down newspaper and then cardboard and then something heavy to hold it down. And usually within a year or 2, the giltweed has died. It's important to note that when you do control, say pull out garlic mustard from your garden, that you put it into a plastic bag and not into a yard waste bag. This is because a lot of these species can seed out and can reproduce vegetatively, which means they can grow from a small root or a piece of the plant. So it's important to put it in a plastic bag, as you can see in the pictures, and have it solarized. So sit on your driveway for a little while, a week or 2 to heat up and really kill the plant on the inside. And another option for landowners who have ponds, and they may have a species called Phragmites, which is a very tall reed grass. You can see in the photo on the one side, someone with really big rubber boots on called hip waders. She's in a reservoir cutting to drown Phragmites. So you basically cut the Phragmites off at the bed of your pond, and you can drown it because it it doesn't grow well in deep water. Next slide, please. So this is poll number 2. So are you aware of any other invasive species in your area? So we'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1, and see where people, if people are aware of invasive species in their area. Okay, so it's a mix. It's a mix of yes and somewhat not aware, and it's great for the people who are not aware, so you're learning a little bit about LDD moth and other invasive species. That's great. So then next slide, please. I'm going to hand it off back to Jen to discuss what Conservation Halton is doing in their LDD program.
Thanks, Leslie. So we do a lot of education. We We perform a lot of landowner site visits and give people management advice on their forests and on these types of outbreaks. This picture on the right was taken at one of our properties in South Milton last year before the big outbreak. You can see the egg masses are clustered on everything. We do a lot of field staff training. We promote management options on our webpage. We promote it over social media posts, and we do a lot of collaboration with our partner municipalities and other CAs in our area. Our integrated pest management program, we have a long-term active management of EAB affected areas. We're doing expansion and remeasurement of long-term monitoring plots on conservation halton lands, and that spans our whole watershed so that we get a real snapshot of what's happening across the area. In the past, last year, we did a targeted BTK spray in the south half of our watershed, and we did about 126 hectares last year. And the last time we did that was in 2008. So it's really a cycle about every 10 to 12 years, and combined with other factors is why we decided to spray. There are manual and chemical controls of weedy and herbaceous invasive species. We undertake those both with staff and with volunteers. And then we investigate the viability of treating our amenity trees in our parks and around our campgrounds to see whether or not they really need to be sprayed or if we think that they'll be able to make it out on their own. Another big portion of our management is including forest management operations in our toolkit. So if we know that a stand is being really heavily affected by, both LDD moth and other invasive species and climate change and years of repeated drought, sometimes a bit of a forest thinning can help just revamp that forested stand and give it a boost. Next slide, please. Back to Brianna, sorry.
That's all good. So what is CBC doing? So CBC has also increased our education and awareness efforts. So this has included adding an LDD invasive species spotlight on our webpage that we keep updated with information and management techniques. We've also will be releasing information to the public and have been releasing information through online blogs, newsletters, social media posts, and co-hosting events like this webinar. With the CBC board approval of our updated invasive species strategy in 2020, we've started development of an integrated pest management framework, which will expand our existing long-term monitoring plots to target priority areas within our conservation areas with respect to current and potential invasive species threats. So this includes monitoring for the LDD moth, which started last fall and allows us to assess our properties for if and where a management response is necessary across our lands. This spring, we are determining if there are any localized ground management techniques that will be employed to protect our amenity trees and conservation areas. We'll also be supporting the City of Mississauga's LDD management program as it relates to CBC-owned lands. With that, I'll turn it back over to Leslie to talk about what they're doing at HCA.
Thanks, Brianna. So at HCA, we are doing similar to the other CAs, education. We have social media posts. We have stewardship site visits to educate our local landowners that are impacted by the LDD moth. We have a volunteer egg mass scraping program where you can, just wrapping up this week, you could pick up a container and a scraper and go help us scrape LDD moth off our significant landscape trees and significant trees in our forest. We're also fielding public inquiries as they come in. We also have been doing egg mass scraping of significant trees in our forest. We'll be doing burlap banding on key trees. And if you don't know what burlap banding is, just hold on. There's going to be a video about that later in the webinar. We also do LDD egg mass monitoring, which you can see in the picture. That's one of our staff using binoculars to count the number of egg masses in the upper canopy of the trees. And we're also starting a defoliation and relief monitoring program, which means we will be watching as the leaves are eaten away on the trees to see how, if our forecast of severe actually results in a severe defoliation, and then how the trees do as they recover through the season. And now off to Corey at LSRCA to see what they're doing.
Awesome, thanks, Leslie. So what is Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority doing? So we're focused also heavily on education. So answering questions from the public as they come in via multiple platforms, such as email, phone. We do get in-person questions as well when we're out on our lands. We get people asking questions about what they're seeing in the forest. So we do our best to respond to those as well. We do also get phone calls and site visits offering advice to landowners on how they can keep their forests healthy. As was mentioned earlier, I think by Jen, having a healthy forest and promoting healthy forest management practices is good for the forest in general, and will keep it healthy and able to rebound following some defoliation events like this. We also do maintain a website and active social media accounts to help assist the public. If they do have questions, they can go on our website and have a peek. As well, dealing with, sorry, I meant to say we're also retweeting and promoting our partner messaging as well as it comes in, whether it's from our member municipalities or our partner conservation authorities or things like that. As you can see, we're also on a webinar today, so we're helping with that kind of promotion as well to keep people informed. So helping with working groups and invasive species in general across our watershed as well to keep people informed. With respect to integrated pest management, we're facilitating EGMAS surveys on our properties in partnership with our local municipal partners. So if there's some plans to do some EGMAS surveys, we're happy to partner up and offer up our land holdings as possible survey grounds, and then having access to that kind of data later on helps us with management. We have burlap banded some prominent trees, such as areas in your parking areas or kiosks, picnic tables, things like that. And then the last thing I did want to mention was we've done a pilot program as well to introduce the NPV virus into caterpillar populations that doesn't seem to have it. So what I mean by that is collecting caterpillars from areas that have a high incidence rate of the virus and actually moving those caterpillars to other areas that are heavily infested already, but we haven't seen evidence of the virus. So that was a bit of a program that we undertook. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Karen from Toronto Region Conservation Authority.
Thanks, Corey. So similar to what the other conservation authorities are doing, this year TRCA is focusing on education. We maintain a webpage that we update regularly, and if you search for it in your internet browser, you should easily find it, TRCA LDD. We're of course participating in this webinar tonight. We're also doing social media posts to make sure that the public is aware of LDD and some of the steps you can take to protect your own trees. We're educating our park and volunteer staff, our park staff and volunteers, so that they're better able to tell people about LDD if they're asked about it when they're visiting some of our conservation areas. We also support knowledge transfer and coordination by participating in invasive species committees with our municipal partners and neighboring conservation authorities. And we field dozens and dozens of public inquiries about LDD every year. Our monitoring has indicated that we're looking to light to moderate infestations, but there will be areas that have severe infestations. And we're undertaking an integrated pest management approach for these areas, including burlap banding on key trees in our conservation parks to ensure that they remain leafy and available for shade in the summer. And next slide, please. Now we're going to launch our next poll, and that's asking you if you have done any LDD management yourself. So your options are burlap banding, pesticide, EGMAS scraping, hand picking, or that you haven't done any management. And we're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's an interesting mix. So about a quarter of us haven't done any management whatsoever, and there's been quite a bit, I would say, of hand picking and EGMAS scraping, which is great. Next slide, please. I think I'm handing it over to Leslie to tell us about what you can do.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, so you've heard all about what the conservation authorities are doing and other invasive species and the history of LDD moss. So what can you do as a homeowner? So there are a few key things, and on this slide, we're indicating that you can learn about LDD moth, which you're doing by attending this webinar. There's lots of information on the internet and on the various web pages for the conservation authorities on this phone call in order for you to learn how to identify LDD. You can keep your trees healthy. So if we have a drought, keep your trees watered, especially if they're a landscape tree in your front yard. You can fertilize them with appropriate fertilizers for that species. So keeping them healthy can help them to re-leaf and survive the defoliation. Another thing you can do is to submit your sightings to the Invasive Species Hotline or through EDD Maps Ontario. So you can see on this slide, you'll see a kind of the North Shore of Lake Ontario and a whole bunch of red dots. Those are all people who have entered in their LDD sightings to EDDMaps, and it displays these maps that can show you the distribution where people have found LDD maps throughout Ontario. Next slide, please. And so what can you do for the spongy moth? So you can see on the one side, there's a life cycle. This is a great infographic that shows you the points at which you should be doing different management techniques. So in about September, we say maybe November to let the parasitic wasp take effect, you can start scraping your egg masses. So any egg masses you can find on the bottom of the tree and anything you can reach, you should scrape off. You can also look under if you have any lawn furniture out. They're not discriminant, they can just lay on those too. So look at those, scrape them off. And you think this is not a significant thing to do, just remember that egg masses can contain 300 to 1,000 eggs. So, if you get 5,000 egg masses, you've got 5,000 eggs. So that's fantastic. If you just do that through the winter, and you have such a long time to do it. Lots of scraping, and do it really slowly if you have lots of trees. So you can see in this one picture in the middle, that's one of our staff scraping some of our landscape trees. You can use a milk jug and a putty knife or a peanut butter jar. And once you scrape them, you just make sure you dump them into a bucket of soapy water and stir it around a little, break up the egg masses so they don't survive. That's why we don't recommend you just scrape them off, because it can lay on the ground and still survive. Another thing you can do just as you come into May is you can do pesticide application. It is very timing specific. You have to be right on with your timing when your leaves are coming out and the caterpillars are starting to come out, because the caterpillars need to eat BTK. So that's one of the pesticides you can use is BTK. You can spray it. It can be sprayed onto a landscape tree. You can also use triazine. And then you can also handpick the caterpillars off. And this is done obviously once they start to come out. And then you can also do burlap banding and caterpillar picking kind of as a combination. You can see that on the other picture on this slide is one of our staff picking off caterpillars under a burlap band, but we also have a video that we like to show you. So we'll load that up now, and you can see how to do burlap banding on your own property.
HCA Insider, How to Burlap Against Gypsy Moths, Lymantria dispar. After removing gypsy moth egg masses from the trunk of your tree, the next control method is to burlap the tree. This method is effective in capturing the population within the canopy. The tools you will need are gloves, a cutting tool, twine or rope, 20-inch burlap, dish detergent, and a bucket with warm water. You can burlap your tree at the end of April, beginning of May, and have it stay up until the end of August to capture gypsy moths at each life stage, the caterpillar, pupa, and moth. At the beginning of May, caterpillars emerge and move down the trunk of the tree to seek shelter from predators and heat. By creating a burlap trap, you reduce the number of caterpillars moving back into the canopy. Step 1 is to wrap a piece of burlap flat around the stem of your tree and cut it to an appropriate size. Step 2 is to secure your burlap with twine or rope around the center. Step 3 is to drape the burlap over the twine or rope so that there is an overhang. Step 4 is to check the traps daily by lifting the overhanging burlap. Checking daily is recommended, but at minimum once a week. Collect the caterpillars into a bucket of soapy water, then discard into the garbage. Thank you for watching. For more information, please visit our website at conservationhamilton.ca.
Okay, hopefully you learned a lot from that quick web video. You can also access all the different conservation authorities that are on this call to see their different techniques and information about LDD moth. And next slide, please. I'm going to hand it back now to Freya, who will moderate our question and answer period. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. I was trying to find my camera screen when I'm looking at all the questions that were coming in. So I would like to thank everyone. Thanks to all the presenters for delivering so much information tonight. And we're going to shift to the question and answer portion of the evening. So as outlined at the onset of the presentation, due to the number of folks in the call, we're going to keep everyone muted except for the panelists to limit background noise. So if you have questions, please write them in the chat and I will present them to our presenters. So I thought I would start off with one which is for all of the conservation authorities, which is it was asked if you are adding any additional staff to work on this issue, as we all seem stretched pretty thin. So I don't know if I'll start with Karen, since you're the first panelist on my window of who I see, and we can work our way across. If you have any comments, I feel like we're all going to say very similar things, but take it away, Karen.
Thanks, Freya. No, we're not adding additional staff to address the LDD moth population. We do have an invasive species team, and that team undertakes a variety of invasive species work, mostly working on species that have a real impact on our landscape. And those staff members undertake the LDD egg mass surveys in the fall, but that's just part of their normal workload.
Corey, if you want to go next.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would echo the same thoughts as Karen. We're not adding any staff to this specifically. We're going to be focusing on what we chatted about earlier in our slides about education and helping people get through this on their using tools that are available to them. We'll also be focusing on just keeping our forests as healthy as we can in our land holdings to keep them as resilient as we can. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for the question.
Jen?
Same boat as everybody else. Unfortunately, our forestry department is small and we don't have an invasive species team as of yet. So we will be just focusing on the monitoring and trying to stamp out the hot spots as they come up.
Brianna?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what everybody has said, most similar to Karen, I guess, we do have a dedicated invasive species team, as Karen said, and that team is responsible for implementing our integrated pest management program, which is what we have incorporated our LDD management and monitoring into. So as Karen said, our staff have been doing monitoring over the fall and the winter time. And then we do other invasive species management for other impacts across the landscape throughout the spring, summer, and fall.
And last but not least, Leslie.
It's the same here. We have luckily a dedicated team of 2 that do our invasive species management. So in the appropriate season, they concentrate on LDD moths. So that's what we'll be doing over the spring and summer as we move forward.
Great. So there was quite a few questions on egg mass scraping. Obviously, this is a easy technique for everyone to do, so I can understand why there's a lot of questions. Some of them Karen did address in the chat, but to summarize, it's best to scrape off and put in soapy water, as Leslie had mentioned. Another fun tidbit I found out with my kids is if you throw them in a fire, they make a very satisfying crackly sound. So that is another option. If you have a fire burning, you can also make some LDD crackers. So I'm going to ask Leslie, there was a few other ones that hadn't been addressed yet, so I will bring those to you. So the first one was on if pressure washing is effective at all, obviously for reaching those higher parts of the canopy and into the trees that you can't get just by doing from the ground or from a ladder. But they were just curious if they've just basically dispersed all these egg masses now onto the ground with the pressure washer.
Yeah, I think that's right, Freya. I think if you used a pressure washer, because those egg masses can hold 300 to 1,000, maybe you'll kill 25% with your pressure washer, but then you're left with the 75% on the ground that will then hatch in the spring and come back to your tree. So It might be a satisfying method, but I don't know how effective it would be.
Okay, the next one is on the use of vinegar. Oh, sorry.
Right,
Go
I
ahead,
was
Bree.
just going to interject that
Yep.
there has been success with vacuuming the egg masses off of trees using either a shop vac or they make like backpack vacuums. If you have a big property and you're really into it, you could splurge for one of those. But a lot of people use shop vacs. I've seen people retrofit them with coffee filters and other things to help catch those egg masses as they go through and catch in the filter or bag and then are deposited into the bucket of soapy water from there. You can rig extension handles on them and still get appropriate suction so that you can get at least sort of the bottom kind of half of the tree more than you would be able to reach just by hand scraping alone.
So the next question was on the use of vinegar. So I know we've been suggesting soapy water. Does anybody want to chime in on if vinegar has been proven to be effective?
I've never heard of it for this use. I've heard of it for some control of invasive plants, but the whole reason for the soapy water is so that it's called wet water and it absorbs into the caterpillar better and helps drown them. So it seems to be the most effective and cheapest method.
And then there was also a couple questions about using duct tape. So I thought I would bring that up. And Leslie, if you want to answer on, do we recommend the use of duct tape?
Did you say duct tape, Freya?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually do see that often in my neighborhood, and we actually did use it, Tanglefoot. We used it a couple of years ago, but I think we noticed and others have noticed that there's a lot of what they call incidental trapping. So yes, you're going for the LDD moth caterpillars, but you also get everything else that flies by and gets stuck on those duct tape traps. So, you know, and I think that the burlap's actually much more successful if you can go out and pick them off. But anybody else have any other suggestions?
I'll jump in. I would agree with that. We haven't used the duct tape method because of the amount of incidentals, and I think that you'd find that you get a lot of other critters in there. I think the burlap bands, because the caterpillars are coming down for that shelter during the day and to escape the heat, I think you're more likely to find a heavy amount of caterpillars in the band and be a little bit more successful that way. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree. Caution against the use of tape because you're likely to trap more non-target species than you are LDD.
Great. And then the last one around, I guess this isn't so much, it's moved on from egg mass scraping, but is they wanted a question about expanding on what the manual introduction of the MPV virus. What do we mean when we say that?
Sure, I can take that one because that is something that we tried last summer. So when on some of our lands, we had what we call the high incidence of the nucleopolyhydrosis. I think I said that right, virus. We call it MPV for short. We found that there was a heavy population of NPV virus and the virus is 100% fatal to the caterpillar. So when we saw that virus expanding in the population, we actually physically moved a few caterpillars to areas that didn't have the virus. Of course, the areas we moved them to they had caterpillars. We weren't introducing caterpillars to an area that didn't have them, but it's just a way to move the virus around. Caterpillars aren't very good at social distancing, so we think maybe it worked, but we can't collect data to know how much of the virus we spread. So I don't know that I'd recommend it for other folks to try. It's just something that we did on some of our lands. So if there's any other questions about it, I'm happy to try to tackle those.
And then there was a couple questions on BTK spraying. So where is it? So they wanted to know what you can purchase in the stores. Another person asked if we have any suggestions on where you can get this product, as well as if it's the same concentration as what an arborist would use. And then what is the best time to spray? Brianna, do you want to take this one?
So you can purchase it at some home and garden stores. I know things, stores like Home Depot or Rona have had it in the past. I'm not exactly sure Home Hardware. I know that it sells out really quickly, especially once it gets to that stage where the chewing of the leaves gets noticeable. So start of June to, mid-June, July, when the caterpillars really start getting hungry, really start eating those leaves, everybody runs to the store and it sells out. So if you're interested in pursuing that method, I would suggest getting it early to make sure that you can get your hands on some and have it ready when you need it. As one of our panelists mentioned during the presentation, the timing is really critical. You want to make sure the caterpillars are eating the leaves and that the leaves are properly leafed out so that the caterpillars are feeding, but you don't want to wait too long because the insecticide is most effective when the caterpillars are small because it affects their stomach and their digestive system. It's better when they're a little bit littler and you get higher mortality that way. Now, forgive me, I forget the second half of the question.
Best time to spray.
Yeah, so what we're targeting really is the third growth stage or the instar of growth. And for our region, that generally happens around sort of May 2-4 weekend. You want to wait when the leaves are leafed out, 3/4 to all the way, but the caterpillars are still small. So when there's an aerial application or another sort of large scale application, ground spraying, we usually do 2 applications of the insecticide. So you do one around May 2-4 weekend and then another about a week to 2 weeks later. And that captures any caterpillars that were either missed the first time or have hatched a little bit later and are going through those growth stages a couple weeks later. And that gives you better coverage. So if you were going to apply it, we would recommend 2 applications in order to catch that full range.
I would just like to add a word of caution about BTK because it is non-specific to Lepidoptera species. So any butterfly or moth caterpillar that eats a leaf that's been treated with BTK will die. So you don't want to be spraying this stuff everywhere. You want to make sure it's really targeted and that it's really needed for LDD because this happens at a time of year that is critical for migrating and breeding birds, and birds rely on caterpillars to raise their young. So just be careful with BTK.
Okay. There have been a few more questions on the, oh geez, where am I? Too many. Doing burlapping. So there's one on if there's any programs to get burlap free or subsidized for if you have lots of trees. I know we've been working with our municipalities, but I don't know who would like to address that. I guess, Brianna, do you want to say like the ones we're aware of in our watershed that are doing the burlap giveaways?
For sure. So I know the town of Caledon was working on doing some burlap banding giveaways as well as City of Mississauga. And I know the town of Halton Hills was investigating the potential for that. I'm not sure if they have released that program or not, but it also is commercially available. You can buy it at garden centers. You can also buy it from fabric stores or online if you need to get your hands on it. Unfortunately, those places won't be subsidized. But if you needed to get your hands on a lot, you can buy it by the bolt and get large quantities that way.
And another question on if you're seeing the caterpillars hanging in that V shape, so you know that they've been infected by the virus, is it a good idea to leave them hanging? And will that help? Corey, do you want to take that one? You look like you're about to open.
Sure, yeah, I can try that. I think it's best to leave them where they are because the virus is spread in terms of contact with other caterpillars. So if you leave the caterpillars out on the tree, I think other caterpillars are going to brush up against it. Birds might come up against it as well and transport the virus around that way. So the virus only kills the LDD moth. So it can come in contact with other critters and be transported around. So I think the more dead caterpillars, I hate to say it, out there in the environment, the better, the more of the virus will be around. And like I said, the virus is 100% fatal. So having lots of that in the environment is probably a good thing.
And in related to other sort of the natural predators or the natural controls that we're seeing here, Is there a way that we can encourage the mold to spread? Karen, we haven't heard from you in a bit. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. I'm actually not aware that you can help spread the fungus. The fungus is really weather dependent. So for the fungus to be effective, we need a nice, cool, damp temperatures. And we're seeing that now in April. So fingers crossed that that the fungus is, expanding within the soils and will infect these caterpillars. I'd also like to note that we had some pretty cold temperatures this winter in many areas of the province, and that bodes well for egg mass mortality. The colder it gets, the more likely that eggs are not able to survive the cold as long as they weren't covered by snow. So fingers crossed that we won't have as many caterpillars hatching this year as we did last.
Thanks, Karen. Okay. A couple of questions around, I guess, the life cycle in terms of how long do we think they're going to be around? And I feel like we've addressed this, but if anybody wants to expand, I know, Karen, you talked about sort of the forecast, but if you had anything else to add on, if we can give a more finite answer, but I feel like we can't.
I'm hesitant to do that because I'll probably be wrong. But I mean, if it's anything like last year, it really peaked in June, and in some areas of the TRCA jurisdiction, it looked like winter in June, and it's very alarming, and I understand that. Most of the trees reflush though, and we even saw some conifers reflushing, which is really remarkable. So as I mentioned in the presentation, for the most part, our natural areas are well equipped to deal with this pest. The areas that we need to worry about are the really urban areas and street trees that are likely under a lot more stress just because of salt and soil compaction, and they're not able to withstand the defoliation of LDD. So that is why our municipal partners are concerned about this pest.
The next one is on the pheromone traps and the female moths. So there's been a few questions about that. Some people have said that they've actually done the pheromone trapping and they found it effective. So would someone like to speak to a bit more on, expand on the pheromone traps and sort of what it's used for and when, if it is an effective control technique?
I can speak to that a little bit. We did investigate pheromone trapping and tried it for a while, and then we were informed by VVN MNRF that it's not an effective control measure. All you're doing is bringing in more male moths into your area. Unless you're emptying it out like you do with the burlap bands and killing the moths, it's not an effective control measure at all. They're not even good for estimating populations, just because the pheromone is so widespread that all the male moths are just coming in and looking for more females. So it might actually be doing the opposite of what you want to do.
Okay, there's a couple of questions sort of related on if there's a way to go after the females. They're asking if they are flightless, then how do they get around? Does anybody want to take on that in terms of if there's other techniques? To me, obviously, the getting them when they're caterpillars is the easiest. I feel like it's less disturbing to crush a caterpillar than a moth. I don't know why. If anybody
You can also crush the pupa. Yeah, so basically female moths live where they pupate. And so when they're in pupa form for a couple of weeks. And during that time, feel free to remove them, crush them, dispose of them. And if you miss that pupa stage and you've got the stomach for it, feel free to squish the female moths as well.
Okay, and there was a question about conifers. So they had some conifer species of pine and spruce that got hit hard last year, and so they lost a lot of the new growth at the tops. So they said the rest of the trees seem healthy now, but they're just curious as to if the tops will regrow and if we have any recommendations on what they could do to sort of help support those trees to sort of keep them less stressed out.
I would wait Sorry, I'll
Go for
take
it,
that
Jen.
one if you don't mind. I would wait and just see if the candles reflush. If they don't, they will fall off, they'll dry out and fall off, and a new branch will take over as the main stem of the tree. So I would wait. Nature has a way of taking care of itself in these instances. So yeah, if it's not like your front yard tree, I would just leave them and see what happens.
Next is on how can you tell if egg masses have been parasitized? Is it easy to ID? As well as maybe also similar to that is there, or maybe we already addressed if how we can get the virus into the woodlots. I think Corey, you'd mentioned that already, right? So we'll just stick with parasitism of the egg masses. Can someone provide sort of what to look for?
I can speak to
You're
that if you want.
nodding.
Sure, yeah, I can talk. So one of the key features, at least for some of the parasitic wasps and small insects that parasitize the egg masses in the fall, you can see it as small little pinpricks in the egg masses. And if you're out in October, sometimes you can actually see the little wasps emerging. They look not like you would imagine a wasp to look like. They almost look like small black flies with kind of iridescent wings, and they're quite tiny, like about the size of a grain of rice. And they will emerge from the egg masses usually end of September through the mid to late October. So if you see a lot of small holes in your egg masses, that's a good time to go look and see if you have any friends helping you out.
Great. I'm just scanning to see if there's any others. There is a question about how high in the tree to install the burlap. I feel like that was shown in the video, but if anybody wants to address that question in more detail, I think there's kind of got some wiggle room in that one. Leslie, do you want to tackle that question?
Sure. I think in the video it shows it about chest height or just above. So I would say, you know, at chest height, something that's comfortable if you're going to do that every day or every other day. You know, pull it up and pick off the caterpillars. Don't put it too high. They're coming down off the tree to, you know, and shading in that to get away from the heat and the predators. So yeah, probably I would say chest height, easy reach for you to then take the caterpillars out and kill them.
And additionally to banding details, could anyone provide how we would recommend prioritizing which trees to band? Corey, I feel like we haven't heard from you in a bit.
Yeah, I can go for that one. So the favorite food would be an oak species. So I would focus on something like that. I would focus as well on a tree that is easy for you to access. So, you know, whether it's on your front yard or your backyard, something that's easy for you to get to so that you can. Those traps do need maintenance. So making sure you go back every now and then to empty them out. So yeah, something that's prominent, a tree that's really important to you, that's large enough to get a burlap band around, and something that's accessible to you is what I would recommend. And I would also, like I said, stick to the oak species or something that if you saw some defoliation damage on a tree last year, chances are you may see it this year. So you might want to pick that tree to try banding.
I might also add too, if you have, you know, if you're on a hill or slope, they do tend to be more predominant on sort of the upland, higher slopes and drier areas. So if you have that kind of, you know, different topography on your property, it might be a good idea to focus on those places first.
And some more questions about the soapy water technique. So do you need to strain them somehow? I feel like, Karen, you already addressed that we're just drowning them out, but did you have anything to add in terms of that technique?
I would just add that you want to make sure that your soapy water is well agitated. We had an incident last year where we had scraped a whole bunch of egg masses into a bucket of soapy water, but it wasn't really like foamy soapy, and those eggs hatched. So you want to make sure your water is well agitated and that the egg masses, like as someone mentioned, you've got to sort of stir them to break them up and have them try to absorb that water. Leave them there for a couple of days, then they should be dead, and then you can strain the water out and throw those eggs into the garbage or into a campfire if you want to enjoy the cracking sound.
And I'm going to pose another question to you, Karen, because it's a TRCA question. And there's a question on if TRCA is treating trees in the East Don Ravine?
So TRCA property in the City of Toronto is actually mostly under management agreement with the City of Toronto. So the City of Toronto is planning on an aerial spray this year, and you can visit their website to hear more about it. I don't believe the East Don is on the list to be treated, but as I said, you can confirm that on their website.
And there's a question, I believe it was Leslie who was talking about the other invasive species and other, oh, maybe it was Jen with the forest pests. But they were asking about our ash trees that have been affected by EAB, and so they're already stressed. And there was a question on if those will also be more prone to impacts from LDD.
EAB is so aggressive. I don't think the gypsy or the LDD moth will have much of a chance to get to those ash trees, unfortunately. Ash isn't one of the preferred species for LDD moths, so it's not something that we normally saw very much of. But I think EAB is a much greater concern, and yeah, there's just no hope for them at this point.
There's also a few questions on for landowners with larger properties. I know Corey had spoken to sort of how to prioritize what trees to ban, but if you have a large property and you can't go out and ban every tree and check every tree every day, what are we recommending in terms of what management techniques are available for them, not just for hardwoods, but also the conifers?
I can take a stab at it. So I would say a really good technique would be egg mass scraping. I realize that if you have a large property, that's a lot of work, but you also have a really long time to do it, as Leslie mentioned. So anytime from sort of end of October, start of November, all the way up until the eggs hatch at end of April. And so there's a way to kind of prioritize your trees, try to scrape the egg masses, and you can focus, like we've been saying, on some of those sort of higher hit priority areas. So any sort of clusters of your forest that have some of those preferred host species. So if you have pockets of oak or maple or poplar or willow, those would be great places to start. As well, if you have any upland areas where LDD is a little bit more prominent, or areas where you noticed a lot of defoliation in the previous year, those would be great places to start an egg mass scraping program and work out from there to try to reduce those numbers and protect those trees a little bit. You could also, a lot of what we do in terms of integrated pest management is using multiple techniques side by side in order to expand your reach and help deal with the pests across different life stages. So you could do egg mass scraping as well as banding, focusing on priority trees for the banding or ones that were really heavily defoliated in the previous year. LDD tends to focus a lot on sort of edges or warmer areas. So even if you have sort of the outer section of your forest or the part that's closest to your house or forest edge, might be a great place to start if you wanted to ban some select trees and provide a little bit more protection to the rest of the forest as well.
I would add that you could also talk to your neighbors and ask for an aerial spray to occur if it looks like your forest is going to be heavily hit by LDD. I am aware of several neighbors that have gotten together and have got a spray contract and did get their forest sprayed.
Sorry, Jen. I'll jump in too really quickly. I think those are great answers, and I think it's another opportunity for landowners to get to know their forests a little bit better and make sure that they are healthy overall. So start looking up those resources online about your forest, about what species you have, about what other pests may be active in the forest, and look at ways that if management's required, whether it's some sort of sustainable forest management activity or any other sort of thing like that. So it's worth starting to look into those resources, educating further about what you have on the property and what is susceptible and things like that. So I throw that in there too.
Anybody else want to jump in? Nope. Perfect. There was another question on the skin reaction from the caterpillar fuzz. So I know, Karen, you had the slides. That's actually from one of our coworkers at CBC. So it was great. We had a great model, although she didn't appreciate it. But Karen, if you wanted to give a bit more on sort of what causes that.
Sure. LDD caterpillars have these bristly hairs on them, and they're there on purpose. They're there to protect the caterpillar so that it doesn't get eaten by predators. But in really serious infestations, when the caterpillars are blowing around on the wind, or there's just so numerous, you can't avoid encountering them on the landscape. Some people have really severe reactions when the caterpillar touches their skin. These reactions are temporary for the most part, from what I know of. I personally haven't had the reaction, and you can speak to your doctor or your pharmacist to get a cream to try to help with that rash and make it not so uncomfortable for you.
And sorry, I'll jump in again, and I would just recommend that anybody who is doing manual control does wear gloves just to limit that. In fact, I'm not sure if we mentioned that or not, but if you are one of those who reacts to it, better to not find out and instead just wear gloves when you're dealing with it.
Okay. There was a great one that I think that I might post to everyone again, which is how can residents, what can they do to help advocate for funding and bringing attention to this? So do we have any tips or contacts or recommendations of what they should be pushing for or who they should be lobbying? So maybe because I started at Karen's side last time, I will start at Leslie's side this time in terms of, do you have any recommendations or tips, or who should people be reaching out to try and lobby for support on doing management of these types of investigations?
That's a good question. Well, I know we get a lot of lobbies to our counselors when the infestations are high, but I think, yeah, I mean, you could talk to your local ward counselor, and you can also talk to your conservation authority about what's happening on the landscape. Yeah, I mean, it depends what you're advocating for. If you're advocating for a BTK spray or for this more integrated pest management work. Yeah, I don't have a great answer for that one, actually.
Bree or Jen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is maybe also lobbying some of your community members and neighbors. Like Karen was saying, if you are in more rural community with a large forested area, getting your neighbors together to, do a BTK spray if it's going to be a really heavy hit year, or if your trees are under a lot of stress is an option, as well as if you're in a more urban area, you can, get your neighborhood or your subdivision or wherever that may be, to help with a banding program or to help with egg mass scraping, to organize yourselves to maybe adopt a local park and help out your local municipalities, or even, the ravine behind your property, or anywhere, even successive backyards. By compounding group efforts, the wider area you can get, that you're minimizing caterpillars, the better off your trees will be, because there is some, the small caterpillars can blow in the wind and the male moths can travel a little bit. The bigger area you can manage, the better off your trees will be.
I would also encourage people to attend the Forest Health Review. It's usually an online forum, and the MNDM and NRF promote this each year, and they give a snapshot of insect populations and new pathogens that are kind of coming up for our areas. So if you attend that, you'll have a kind of good idea of what to expect in the coming years for your particular area. If you are considering a BTK spray and you get together with your neighbors to do that, please be warned that the people that apply those sprays usually need to know by March 1st of the year preceding the spray. So you have to have that organized as soon as possible.
There has been a few more questions on the aerial spray. So there's been some questions posed on what the impact is on our other native and beneficial caterpillar species. So does somebody want to, I know Karen, you had addressed it a little bit already, but if you could expand on that, or if Jen, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah.
Sure. I think it's important, everyone, to remember that this invasive species is naturalized and has natural controls on the landscape. And the conservation authorities here tonight are facing infestations by species that have no natural controls. And these are enacting large-scale landscape changes. And this is in the form of invasive plants, pathogens, and other pests such as emerald ash borer. So yes, it's alarming and it really, unfortunate to have this LDD infestation, but it is temporary. It's just a temporary nuisance. It's going to go away eventually, and we can all go back to enjoying our forests and green spaces. I think if you're going to advocate for LDD control, it really should be for urban areas and trees that are likely to not survive an infestation. These are trees that are more stressed. But for the most part, natural areas are perfectly fine in withstanding this LDD infestation. The BTK spray is non-specific to all moths and butterflies. So anytime a caterpillar from any moth or butterfly species will eat a leaf that has been treated with BTK, it will kill that species, regardless of what it is. So this is why we urge caution in applying BTK.
I'd also add too that with the timing of the BTK application, because we do it early just after the caterpillars emerge, like in that first couple of weeks, it's timed so that most of our native species hatch a little bit after that period. So we're hoping to not hit those species as hard. So there is some science, there is definitely science behind it, the application timing.
There was a question about the numbers and if our efforts are actually making outbreaks last longer than they need to because we are sort of reducing the populations. Does anyone want to try and answer that one?
I would say I don't know that we're having that effect on it broad scale. Even the 126 hectares that we sprayed last year are just like a tiny little portion of our land holdings. So I think there's enough habitat still and enough, host species that are still out there that we're not going to force a population crash because we are kind of target spraying where it's really, really bad. My opinion.
There's also been a couple questions on sort of regional level controls in terms of regional forests or street trees. Does anyone want to speak to, I feel like that's hard for us because we're not the municipalities. Yeah, they're just wondering, if everyone's spraying or who isn't spraying. To me, though, that would be obviously the municipalities would be reaching out and letting you know if they are spraying. Does anybody want to add to that in terms of details for your watershed?
I would recommend you reach out to the municipality to find out the details. I would hate to misspeak for them.
And I think most municipalities now are getting pretty good at having web pages and sending out social media information in terms of what they're doing and what their plan is, or even hosting webinars and information sessions. So I think hopefully you guys are getting those. That information is reaching landowners because that's the whole point of it. I'm just looking to see what other questions. About burlapping as well. So I know we said that other critters and things, but people are wondering what the specific species that we're seeing sort of as the non-target species that are getting impacted. Which ones are getting caught? Oh, sorry, this was a burlap one, not the sticky trap. I assumed it was the tanglefoot because that's the one that catches everything. But is there any species that the burlap would catch that we don't want to kill?
For burlapping, Freya?
Yeah, they're asking if the burlap will catch any other species.
I'm not aware that it does. The LDD caterpillars don't like to be active in the heat of the day, especially when they get older. And so that's when they crawl down the trunk and they're seeking shade in that burlap. And the burlap can also help concentrate caterpillar populations. And if they're close together and somebody's infected by NPV, that is going to spread through that population. So it could be a good double whammy.
I would also add to that too, that if you are emptying your burlap, that's a good chance for you to take a look, and hopefully you can now identify what the spongy moth and the LDD looks like. So if you find that there's other species in there, it's maybe worth just trying to let them escape and instead focus on just capturing those moths that you now know how to identify.
Yeah. I was going to add too that we do call it caterpillar trapping, but I guess in the sense of the burlap, it's more like providing a little shelter because they're choosing to be in the burlap. They're not necessarily like getting stuck in there per se. They are choosing to go in there and enjoy the shade and the peace and the, you know, protection from predators. And we're just taking advantage of that choice by concentrating so that we can pick them off the thing. So it's less like we're, you know, there's a potential for other species to get trapped because they're picking, you know, they want to go in there.
And another question on the burlap wrapping, which is when should the burlap be removed? Sorry, I guess I should assign that to someone. Who wants to take it? Sorry, I'm trying to see which other questions are coming in. Any takers? Nobody looks like they're about to speak, so I'm going to assign one of you to it. Leslie, you haven't said anything in a while.
Yeah, I think it's usually late August when you start to see the pupa appear. You'll see those on the trees too. They're like little hanging sacks. When they start to appear, then the caterpillars are mostly done, and you can remove the burlap from your trees and then scrape off those pupa as well.
There is when new questions come in, it jumps on me. There is one here on will caterpillars migrate from decimated areas that were hit last year to more sort of fertile or healthy areas for this year? I think, Karen, do you want to address that? I feel like that ties kind of to the naturalization and the.
Sure. I mean, so caterpillars, when they are hatched, are super tiny. They're just a couple of millimeters big. And so they're not really that mobile by themselves. What they rely on is wind. So they're blown in the wind, and that's how they infest new areas. It's not really that they're actively crawling there.
But they can only travel about 1 kilometer at the most, even borne by wind.
And does anyone have recommendations on fertilizers to use for oak trees to strengthen their immunity?
Mulch.
Water is great.
Water.
Deep watering, especially during dry periods. Sorry, Corey.
No problem. I was going to say I'm hesitant to recommend a fertilizer, but maybe it's worth chatting with an arborist or a tree care professional that actually offers some of these fertilization techniques as part of their business. I can't really recommend any specific product.
And one on if you are looking to hire a contractor, what would you look for? Sort of what type of contractor? I think this is a great question. I know last year when we hosted this webinar, we had some landowners who had reached out to us saying that they had companies offering to spray in like September, which is completely useless, and using really strange chemicals. So does anybody want to speak to what we would recommend in terms of if we're doing spraying options? What would we recommend people look for in a contractor?
I can take a stab at it, and then maybe some other folks can chime in. With any contractor, I would just do your research and make sure that they're reputable. They have good reviews. They have a solid website and a good description of what it is that they focus on. Make sure they are, depending on what type of service you're going after, make sure they're a registered professional forester or a ISA certified arborist. So make sure they have the right skills and expertise and licenses. This license is another good one. If they're going to be spraying, it's not a bad thing to ask contractors about their skills and qualifications. So just make sure the research is done, and insurance too. Make sure they're a legitimate business and they're going to be able to protect you in the event that something does go wrong.
Yeah.
Get more than one quote.
That's a good one. I was gonna say, in terms of like their knowledge and skills about LDD, I would ask them some questions and make sure that they're comfortable with the material and that they know about LDD and its life cycle, about when the proper times to spray are, and just make sure that they would be hitting the window that would be effective. Like as Freya mentioned, we've heard from landowners that had recommendations for spray past the window, which the caterpillars were even out and about when they were, in the moth stage or even in the egg mass stage. And that's not effective. So you want to make sure that they would be providing, legitimate service during the time window where it's appropriate, and that they're knowledgeable about, the product they're going to be using and its recommendations, the label, and other, details about how it should be used or when it should be used, is really important.
And as Brianna was saying, if you can look up to the canopy of your tree and you see a lot of LDD egg masses, make sure you're calling soon, because as you can tell from the webinar, lots of people will be interested in this, and a lot of people call when they start seeing caterpillars or they start having poo falling on them in their backyard. Sometimes that's too late. Sometimes, as Freya mentioned, the contractors are full. They're spraying inappropriate things on the trees. So when landowners call us, I usually tell them to call now. Do your research, as Corey indicated, but call soon so you can get on that list for that contractor to get the spray done in an appropriate time frame.
Okay. There was in sort of, I think, to expand on Karen, what you had talked about, sort of the fact that we have those natural predators. Someone was saying that they understand that. However, their oak forests were decimated last year, and so they have some concern for that. Do you want to expand on sort of from the health perspective in terms of if it is a healthy forest, hopefully it'll bounce back?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I understand the concerns. If it's been less than 3 years of defoliation and your oak forest appears healthy in that there's no other pest or infestations, in all likelihood, most of those trees are going to come back. However, if your oaks look like they're struggling a little bit, or this has been more than 3 years of defoliation, then you are right to be concerned. And I would consult with a professional forester about this and get their input on your forest to make sure that you're taking the right steps, and also that you're not wasting your resources in controlling a pest that doesn't need to be controlled. LDD love oak. I know that I burlapped my backyard oak tree last year, and it did get chewed a little bit, but it wasn't completely defoliated. So the burlap was successful. Obviously, burlapping isn't feasible for an entire forest. So that's why I think, consulting a professional forester and going the route of an aerial spray, if it looks like those oaks are stressed, is probably the way to go.
Perfect timing, Karen. So in the interest of time, it's now 8 o'clock. So I'm going to wrap up this section of our webinar tonight. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. As we move into the spring and through summer, we hope we provided you with information to help you understand what to expect and what you can do to try and reduce the impact on your trees. Please keep in mind that while the caterpillars will be out again this year and the trees will lose some of their leaves, the impacts of this insect pest are temporary, and you can't expect most of them to bounce back again. The conservation authorities listed on the bottom of the slide will be posting tonight's presentation to their websites in the coming days. And I want to thank you again and hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.